developed in proportion to different dimensions of human being. So sometimes man is preoccupied with his mental process. Sometimes human being encounters reality or wants to theorize about the reality on the basis of his mind, on the basis of his, reasons. Sometimes he might theorize and understand the reality, encounter the reality, not on the basis of his mind, but on the basis of his, for example, external senses and the observations and so on. Sometimes we have a deeper and more profound layer of rationality or understanding reality, which can be called the illuminationist or somehow the intuitive rationality. It means rationality that is developed on the basis of intuitions, not mind, not external senses, but internal senses. So if we are going to make some comparisons between, for example, these the first and the second currents of philosophy in Islam, Islamic prepatetics, that is Farabi and Avicenna, and what was developed by the Sohrawardi as the Illuminationist or Oriental philosophy. These differences, I think, can be justified or can be explained in terms of their sources of their knowledge or the tools they use to encounter reality and to make reality understandable. So by using different tools and by using different sources, we come to different rationality. And so that's why, Avicenna developed that type, or that is called prepatetics, and Sohrawardi developed the other types, that is the Illuminationist or Oriental philosophy. And we know, of course, I'm not now in a position exactly to make a detailed comparisons between these two systems of thoughts or these two systems of rationality. But in brief, we can say that for Avicenna, reality was made up of, let us say, existence and non-existence. And so possible and necessary. But for Sohrawardi, the case was completely different. He was not divided or he was not conceptualized, let us say in this way. He was not conceptualizing in terms of existence and non-existence, but in terms of light and darkness. Because by using the internal sense, by using the unveiling way for understanding reality, he observed and he witnessed something totally different from what was experienced by, Avicenna or Farabi. That's why the structures of the reality or the components of the reality that developed by, or enumerated by the Sohrawardi was not, for example, in terms of God or the first cause and then the second, the first intellect and the second intellect, and so not these hierarchical degrees of entities and being, but as Sohrawardi explained, the different degrees of light. So he described the reality as the first light, or the light of lights, as the first cause, as the first origin, and from this first light, the second light, or the dominant light, and anyway, the other lights proceeds. So, unlike Avicenna and Farabi, who said that reality is composed of, or is constituted by, the hierarchical levels of being, the Sohrawardi emphasized on the hierarchical levels of lights. And what is here important is that when a new source of rationality, or the new source of knowledge is coming to the scene and come to the fore, we can say, a new type of rationality is developed. So, if we say we have different types of rationality in the domain of Islamic thoughts, that's because that they have different sources, and they use different tools for knowledge and for encountering their reality. And if they have different modes of rationality, that's because human being is not anyway a being with one dimension, or with one characteristics, or with one faculties. If human being, the nature of human being is somehow composed of different faculties and composed of different levels or dimensions, we can say in proportion to each dimension of human being, a special mode of rationality can be developed and can be depicted, can be in a way envisaged. So, in discussing the different modes of rationality, we cannot ignore the nature of human beings. And this is what I wanted to explain at the beginning. And then I would explain some parts else that is said here. But before I proceed, I would like to ask our friends and our dear guests to have any comments or any questions, so that I would not be monologue. Our discussion is not monologue.
So, yeah, I think that it helps class to be active and interactive.
Yeah.
So if there is a question, yes, Ezra.
So you had in some instances sensual perception, and I was curious in what ways this possibility of including sensual perception within the sphere of Aql differs between Safwardi and Avicenna in light of their existence, non-existence, light, darkness models that you distinguished.
I think I should say, in answering your questions, I should have emphasized on one point, and that was the changeability of the nature of reason. Actually, reason is not like other limbs or human organs that is let us say, growing and being developed physiologically without any participation of our own, for example, and without our own will or exercise of our desires or will. Reason is something which I would, of course, I wanted to explain when we are divided into different things. Reason is a faculty that can be changed and can be enriched and can be developed. So at the beginning, reason, according to, the traditional philosophers, as a human faculty, at the beginning is simply potence, is simple potence, is a pure potential. So it's empty of anything, empty of any concepts, any propositions, any knowledge, any imagination, anything else. But this potence can be developed, can be actualized. Let us use the philosophical terms. So what is the ground for actualizing these potence? The grounds of actualizing these potence is different experiences we have. Sometimes, for example, I observe the reality with my external senses. So with this encounter, I have some input. And these input can be processed, as so to speak, can be processed. It means can be conceptualized, can be utilized. So what about if I have some deeper understanding or deeper encounter with reality? If I have deeper understanding, deeper encounter with reality and deeper experiences, as Ayatollah Arafi said, the different dimensions of human beings are not separate components, it's compartments. They are not separate dimensions. I cannot say my mind is separate from my feelings, as I cannot say that my feeling is different from my heart, from my dimensions of human beings. Because different dimensions of human beings have existential relations with each other. If somebody by spiritual exercises, for example, as Sohrawardi recommended people to do, if they have undergo spiritual experiences and exercises, they might see some lights. If they see some lights, so these visions spontaneously, I can say, automatically, spontaneously affects his mind. And so his mind is somehow, we can say, molded by, informed by new experiences. And so, if Avicenna developed rationality in terms of, the existence and non-existence, or the notions, we can say, these are the notions, because he inherited these systems somehow from Aristotle, from the Aristotelians. So Aristotelian, encountering the external world, they wanted to rationalize it. It means they wanted to have some dependable, acceptable, and plausible understanding of it. So what was their apparatus? What was their tools to understand the reality? They have, we know that Aristotle starts from the senses, external senses. That's why he was called the commonsensical philosopher. And unlike his teacher, his master, Plato. So he was commonsensical philosophers, with senses, you have some input. So with different concepts, so Aristotle had potency and act or actuality, he had the four causes and final, efficient, or anyway material and final causes, and also he had some other, the pairs of concepts in understanding the reality. Again, Avicenna, by deepening his thoughts, he introduced two more notions and two more concepts, and that was the necessity and possibility. And also the distinction between nature, between the essence and existence. So in Aristotle we would not see these distinction between the nature, between the essence and existence. At most, the most things we can see in the Aristotle works is only mental distinction between essence and existence. But what about the external distinction between nature, between the essence and existence? That is what Avicenna and Farabi actually explain. Again, these philosophers have only concepts to rationalize. But these concepts, the question is whether these concepts are obtained arbitrarily at their own will, or no, they have some experiences with reality. They have some, contact with the reality. And now, the point is, the rationality varies, and the currents of thoughts that developed on the basis of the rationality varies and develops because of the, difference of our encounter with reality. So, if from the very beginning I take an empirical stance to reality, and then from the very beginning I take a positivistic, for example, stance to reality and approach to the reality, it means, so I have already decided, and so it means whatever I gained exclusively are obtained through my observations and through my external senses. But if I set aside any prejudices, any biased thinkings and so on, and from beginning I show some openness to reality, as Sohrawardi says, some openness to reality, I can develop a different metaphysics. I can develop, he says, I can develop a different rationality. And again, just to complete as a complementary point in this regard, in answering your questions, he says, Sohrawardi says, the traditional philosophers at that time, it means the Aristotelian and Peripatetic philosophers, they systematize their thoughts, or they brought about a system of thoughts in terms of philosophy. So what was the basis and what was the foundations? He says the observations, the experiences, the data received through their observations on the observatory. So the ordinary observatory, they observed the stars. They enumerated, for example, some planets and so on. They had some, physical view. They have some physical informations. On the basis of these physical, observational, empirical data, Aristotelian could develop a metaphysics. So it means